If you believe in God, and if you believe that God gives his orders directly and clearly to the Pope at the Vatican, so that the Pope is the infallible word of God, if you believe that, then we're done. There's no way we can argue with you. We're not going to piss up that rope. Hi, I'm Penn, and that's my partner, Pope Teller the First. But if your morality is governed by anything personal, ethical, rational, or humanitarian, then the Vatican is bullshit. Behold, Vatican City, the papal crib, God's Las Vegas. Its 109 acres sits smack dab in the center of Rome, Italy. But the Vatican is its own sovereign state, and its 800 nightgown-wearing residents guard an ungodly fortune worth more than $50 billion. From the Crusades to the Inquisition, from condoning slavery to denying the Holocaust, for nearly 2,000 years, Muslims, Jews, gays, women, Africans, children, the poor, and oh, what the hell, let's give an Obama-style shout-out at the very end of the list to non-believers, have all borne the brunt of the Vatican's irresponsible abuse of its powers. Tonight, we'll rip the gilded roof off the Vatican to expose the rats and rat singer inside. Yep, Pope Benedict himself. We'll also meet this Italian comedian who got in serious trouble with the Vatican when she told a joke about the Pope in the middle of Rome. And guess what? A little later, she's gonna piss off the Pope by going there yet again, just for us. God bless her. Generally, we give the other side, you know, the assholes, a chance to be heard. They make their points, and we make fun of them. So we wrote a bunch of nice letters inviting several authorities from the Catholic Church to come on and share their opinions. But for some reason or another, they all declined. Maybe it was the bullshit letterhead. Then we get to thinking, hey, the Catholic Church has been making its points for 2,000 years, testifying by means of encyclicals, Vatican decrees, and other papal bull. All we'll do tonight is a measly 30-minute cross-examination. Now let's get this party started with Pope Benedict XVI.
Peace be with you.
He's arguably the most powerful man in the world, and in Rome, home to the Vatican, everyone loves the Pope, right? Not this woman. She may not be the supreme pontiff, but in Italy, she's almost as famous. A comedian and performance artist with a strong political point of view. She's Chris Rock meets George Carlin, except with breasts and a cool, sexy accent.
Hello, my name is Sabina Guzzanti. I'm a political satirist. I'm a director, filmmaker, and I live in Rome, Italy.
Sorry, Sabina, your English is great, and we don't even know a second language, but we're going to have to add subtitles so no one misses a word of your amazing story. A story that captivated all of Italy in the summer of 2008. Sabina, known for her anti-government beliefs, was invited to appear at a political demonstration.
And I gave a speech about many things, and one of those things was the Vatican intruding in our politics. I just went on stage thinking, let's try to see what's happening. Just say what I think naturally, with natural words, you know, with common language. And a big mess happened, but people was very enthusiastic.
But the pro-Catholic Italian government was not. Pressured intensely by the Vatican, the courts threatened to charge Sabina with the equivalent of slander. Against whom, you ask? Pope Benedict himself.
I think the current Pope is a very, very right-wing Pope. And so, since the situation is getting more and more disgusting here, I thought I had to say something.
But what did she say? What would have infuriated the Pope so much that he'd attempt to silence one of Italy's most famous celebrities by throwing her sexy ass in jail. To fully appreciate what Sabina said, we have to learn a bit more about the Vatican and Pope Benedict.
He seems to be intent on taking the church back as fast as he can to the early 17th century.
Keith Wood is executive director of the National Secular Society in London, which protects the rights of atheists and agnostics.
I have to say that I've been entirely wrong about this Pope. I thought that the last one was as bad as they could get, but the current Pope has demonstrated that he can be much worse than his predecessor.
How? Well, let's start with the Vatican's shameful behavior in 2008 at the UN.
Several nations, led by France and the other members of the European Union, introduced a resolution that would decriminalize people for being gay in countries around the world. And the Vatican opposed that.
Jeff Stone, I'm from the gay Catholic group Dignity USA.
They claimed that it would lead to same-sex marriage, but it has nothing to do with same-sex marriage. It was really just a question of making it legal to be gay so that people couldn't be persecuted, as they have been in many countries, and simply thrown in jail.
A gay Catholic seems like a Jewish Nazi to us, but what he's saying matters. There are still 81 countries where it's illegal to be gay, and 7 where you can actually be put to death for it. The Vatican seems to be okay with that. Maybe that's just a wee bit hypocritical.
One of the most basic teachings of the Catholic Church is that all people are children of God and that they're entitled to dignity and respect. So it seems that the Church is not really living up to that ideal.
And the almost ultimate irony is that I do not know of an organization anywhere that has such a high proportion of gay people in its employ.
Well, the bullshit staff, but he doesn't know that. According to some studies, anywhere between 20 to 50% of all priests may be gay.
So the misery that must be being caused by this nasty man in Rome is almost without parallel.
Believe it or not, the Vatican's official position is that it's not a sin to be gay. They have no idea how anyone might have gotten that impression. However, it is a sin to engage in any sexual activity outside of marriage, and since gay people can't get married, any homosexual funny business is grounds for eternal damnation. Gotcha! Gay activists claim that paradox is kind of like saying it's okay to be a bird as long as you don't fly. And how does that feel? We'd ask a penguin, but she seems to be a little busy right now. Hey, there's our friend Sabina, walking the streets of Rome. She's lived in the city since she was a child and believes the Vatican is determined to get into everyone's business.
They are in the news every day saying what the Pope thinks about everything, about each law, about private life of citizen, lots of declaration against gay people, against people which are not married. So they are like Islamic, basically.
Today, Sabine is a free woman. But for a while, it appeared her headline-making criticism of the Vatican would land her in an Italian prison.
When I gave this speech in the square, I attacked many powers in this country, but the church was one of them, and the church was furious for what I said.
That's because Sabina's speech involves some blasphemous commentary, which we'll translate for you later on. But why would the Vatican make such a point of going after a satirist?
What they wanted to show is something, like I said, couldn't be unpunished.
But why? Isn't Italy a democratic republic, you know, a free country?
It's not a free country, actually, at all. Right now, there is no freedom of expression, but we will take it back, and I like the fight.
And we followed Sabina into her next battle, a one-woman show that very night before a sold-out crowd. Here, she'll bravely revisit her controversial remarks that got her into trouble before. But Sabina is not the only one the Vatican would like to silence.
I'm Jewel Castex, survivor of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. The #1 goal of every bishop, and a part of the vows that they take when they become bishop, is to protect the church from scandal. And protecting the church from scandal means that documents, witnesses, and victims are kept quiet and shuffled away.
Cass Dix is a regional director for SNAP, a survivors network for people who've been abused by priests. She's still angry that her abuser has never been brought to justice.
He was protected by the exact same system that protects all of these priests, which includes orders directly from the Vatican, which require that every diocese have secret personnel files that no one gets a hold of.
Those files are kept on every priest ever accused of sex abuse against a child. They're kept confidential, not to protect the victim, to protect the priest. Yeah, fuck!
The greatest hypocrisy in the church today is that child protection is not the most important thing. Patrick J. Wall, Senior Consultant, Law Firm of Manley and Stewart.
Wall is a former priest who now works for a law firm that prosecutes sex abuse cases involving the church. His firm's been swamped since the bombshell discovery of a secret Vatican document in 2003. It's called the crime of enticement, which they discreetly write in Latin.
Crimen Solicitationis is an interesting document published in 1962 and is an order to all archbishops, bishops, cardinals, and heads of religious orders on how to exactly deal with an accusation of childhood sexual abuse by a cleric.
So, how did this confidential document come to light? Did Jesus return and expose the Vatican's little secret?
There was a priest on the west coast here of California who was being accused of sexual abuse of a minor. And in a way to try to get back at the church, he got one of his buddies who was in the congregation in Rome to give him a copy of the document. And then he gave it to a lawyer, and from there it took off.
Why all the excitement? Because the document contains actual proof of an organized Vatican cover-up. Specifically, this little McNugget. Anyone involved in a sex abuse investigation, the accuser and the accused, are to be restrained by a perpetual silence in all matters and with all persons under the penalty of excommunication. That's Vatican for shut your fucking mouth or go to hell.
The only way to really go after the Vatican is through the civil lawsuit system. You touch their money and you will get their attention. All of a sudden now, we have an opening that never existed in history. Through the courts, we now have the ability to sue the Holy See.
This direct legal threat has led to the church offering half-hearted mea culpas. During a trip to the U.S. in 2008, Pope Benedict said this.
I acknowledge the pain which the church in America has experienced as a result of the sexual abuse of minors.
So the Pope says our church feels bad because children got abused. Not, here's what I'm doing to stop my employees from raping your kids. But in Joelle's mind, the whole apology thing was just a big PR stunt.
It was just a lame effort, I think, to get the media off of his back. There were no answers to the tough questions. There were no answers to why priests who perpetrate are still being put in our schools. There's nothing to protect kids.
Why did the Pope's apology smell like bullshit? Because he himself ordered the cover-up. That's right. Before he became Pope, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger served as prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, during which time he issued a confidential order to every bishop that all sex abuse investigations were to be kept top secret for up to 10 years after the victim reached adulthood, upon penalty of excommunication. You heard right. 10 years after the victim reached fucking adulthood. You're probably wondering, gee, if the Pope did that, why isn't he under some sort of investigation? The answer? In 2005, the Pope was granted immunity from liability in any sex abuse cover-ups in the U.S. by President George W. Bush. But perhaps nothing has provoked more outrage in the international community than the Vatican's unwavering condemnation of condoms, even in the face of overpopulation and AIDS.
The idea that the Vatican stands in the way of the protection that people need is morally and ethically just profoundly wrong.
My name is John O'Brien, and I'm the president of Catholics for Choice.
O'Brien's organization represents the millions of Catholics who disagree with Casti Connubii, the Vatican's rule book on contraception.
Casti Connubii was introduced, it's an encyclical from the bishops in the 1930s. What it basically did was it said you couldn't use diaphragms and condoms because that's what they basically had available at that time.
Those forms of contraception directly violated the Vatican's rule that every sex act must potentially lead to the transmission of life. But then came Vatican II, where the Mass went from Latin to English, but the fucking with no contraceptives stayed the same.
They thought that if they said, you know, we've changed our minds, we got this wrong, we're going to allow contraception, they thought that Catholics would say, well, we want to change everything and anything about the Church.
They don't really trust the people. That's one of the problems. I'm Robert Blair Kaiser, member of the Vatican Press Corps since 1962. They don't give the average Catholic a lot of credit for having any kind of common sense at all, or even a sense of morality.
And yet trust themselves to make the rules when it comes to issues related to sex, despite the fact they vowed to never have it.
There's a bit of a problem if you're celibate and you don't live a married life, making the decisions for other people who are not celibate and do live a married life about what they can and cannot do. I'm sure the bishops do think that natural family planning and the rhythm method is a great method to use, because they've not experienced using it.
Yet those methods are the only ones officially sanctioned by Catholic charities working in Latin America and Africa, where every year thousands of women who've been denied access to condoms die from AIDS and while giving birth. But as always, the Vatican would rather force-feed lethal dogma than help people live.
The bishops regard the widespread and indiscriminate promotion of condoms as an immoral and misguided weapon in our battle against HIV/AIDS.
The Vatican says that a man who has AIDS cannot use a condom, even to save the life of his wife. That's crazy. It's against the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill, to not use a condom.
All that suffering because of its own sick rules, and yet the Vatican says it's pro-life.
There's no doubt in my mind that the Vatican's policy on sex, contraception, has failed. Hanging on to some sort of, ego trip about, the fact that we don't want to say that we got it wrong means that many people in the world suffer and die.
You would think Pope Benedict having God on his side would be enough, but it's not. He tries to reinforce God's position with jamf science about birth control. Earlier this year, the Pope backed a Vatican newspaper report that claimed that hormones in the birth control pill released into nature through female urine have had devastating effects on the environment, which are in turn causing an increase in male infertility. A claim that real medical researchers called ridiculous. The Vatican should leave science to those who believe in it. Wasn't it the Vatican that said the smallpox vaccine is a product of the devil? Love your work, man. Love your work. Meanwhile, all may be quiet at the Vatican, but as the Pope sleeps... Back at Sabina's show, her Fight the Power message is nearing its crescendo.
Basically, the show is like a picture of contemporary Italy to show to the people we are not living in a democracy anymore.
And there's no better proof of that than the firestorm Sabina created with her infamous speech in the summer of 2008. But what does she actually say about the Pope? Well, it was based on this idea.
In the Catholic tradition, the pain you suffer in the hell is related with the guilt you committed in the life.
And in Sabina's mind, what was Pope Benedict guilty of? Attempting to force conservative anti-gay teachings into Italian public schools, which led to Sabina saying this.
E fra 20 anni Ratzinger sarà morto e starà dove deve stare, all'inferno, tormentato da dei diavoloni, frocioni, attivissimi e non passivissimi.
Did you get all that? Sabina almost got thrown into jail for 5 years for saying,
E fra 20 anni Ratzinger sarà morto e Starato deve stare all'inferno, tormentato da dei diavoloni, frocioni, attivissimi e non passivissimi.
and that's funny in Italian or English. After letting Sabina sweat a while, the Italian government finally acknowledged it didn't have a case. And once the Vatican realized Sabina wouldn't be prosecuted, they quickly went into spin mode.
They said they forgave me because they are very wise and full of compassion. So they make me look like I was saved by them.
Yup, they somehow found it in their hearts to forgive her for exercising her right to free speech under Article 21 of the Italian Constitution. But Sabina's in showbiz, so the whole Vatican controversy was great for her career. Sabina's retelling of it is now one of the highlights of her show.
Non ho detto nulla sulla sessualità di Ratzinger, ma che me ne deve importare a me? Niente, allo stesso modo in cui a lui non deve importare nulla della sessualità dei cittadini italiani, nulla!
Oh, you're preaching to the choir, Sabina, baby. But what was the big deal anyway? I mean, why is the Vatican so hell-bent on protecting the Pope's precious image?
The problem that we have is that the Church puts itself forward as the perfect society, as the bella figura, as everything perfect that exists in the world because it's inspired by God and the Holy Spirit. But we know it's a business. And in order to keep that cash flow going, you have to keep that perfect ideal up there in order for people to contribute to it.
Perfect ideal? The Vatican is a festering swamp of intolerance, greed, paranoia, hypocrisy, and callous disregard for human suffering. But the Catholic flock has had its own wool pulled over its eyes for centuries. And in the words of the Pope,
che simili orrori non si ripetano mai più.
The Vatican has never been an honest institution. It's never been a decent institution. And I cannot see in the foreseeable future any reason why it should change from its dreadful, amoral past.
It's all about power. The more well-informed the people are, the less power the Vatican will continue to have.
less power to exclude.
The Vatican has described gay people as oriented toward an intrinsic moral evil.
Less power to silence.
The reaction about what I said was so violent, they had to show to the Italian people they were punishing me.
Less power to kill.
For a married couple to use a condom, it's not about preventing the transmission of life, which is the Vatican's obsession. It's about preventing the transmission of death.
Now, Teller and I, we don't have a God in this fight. But if you believe the Pope really is infallible in giving us the Word of God, then you believe the God he speaks for would silence Italian comedians, does not approve of gay sex, does not want condoms to be used to help control the spread of AIDS, or to stop women from giving birth to unwanted babies. Maybe if you have humanity and compassion, if you have morality and a conscience, if you still believe that there really is a God really pulling the Pope's strings, that God might not be the kind of God you want to worship.
Hallelujah.